The Bible itself tells you to read this book twice, yet you've probably never seen it in any Bible you've ever owned. Open any Bible in your home right now. The King James, the New International Version, the English Standard Version, doesn't matter which translation. You won't find the Book of Jasher, but here's what makes this absolutely bizarre. The Bible doesn't just mention this book in passing. It specifically tells readers to consult it, to verify one of the most impossible miracles ever recorded. When Joshua commanded the sun to stand still in the sky, the biblical author didn't just describe what happened. He told people exactly where to confirm this impossible event. Is this not written in the Book of Jasher? And then it happens again. King David, mourning the death of King Saul, references the Book of Jasher a second time. 2 different books, 2 different authors, centuries of biblical history, and both point to the same mysterious text. So, where is it? Why would the Bible itself cite a source that no longer exists? But the truth is far more disturbing. Let's start with what we know for certain. The year is approximately 1400 BC. Joshua, the successor to Moses, is leading the Israelites in a crucial battle against 5 Amorite kings. The battle is going well, but Joshua has a problem: time. The enemy is fleeing, scattered across the wilderness. If the sun sets, they'll escape into the hills and regroup. Joshua needs more daylight to finish what he started, and so Joshua does something that defies all logic. He prays for the sun to stop moving across the sky. According to the biblical account, that's exactly what happened. For nearly an entire day, the sun didn't set. Now, you might expect the author to move on, to let this miracle stand on its own authority. But that's not what happens. Instead, the writer adds something crucial. Is this not written in the Book of Jasher? Think about what that means. The biblical author is telling his readers to fact-check him. He's pointing them to another source, an external verification of one of the most extraordinary miracles ever recorded. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Fast forward several centuries. King Saul and his son Jonathan have been killed in battle against the Philistines. David, who would become Israel's greatest king, composes a lament, a song of mourning. And once again, the biblical text references the Book of Jasher. 2 separate biblical authors, 2 completely different contexts, one military miracle, one national tragedy, and both pointing to the same book. What many overlooked is this: the Bible is treating the Book of Jasher as authoritative, as reliable, as something that readers should have access to. Yet today, it's nowhere to be found. The Hebrew name for this book is Sefer HaYashar. In English, that translates to the Book of the Upright, or the Book of the Just Man. According to biblical scholars, this wasn't just some minor historical footnote. The Book of Jasher appears to have been a well-known record in ancient Israel, a chronicle of the nation's history, a collection of songs, poetry, and historical accounts that everyone would have recognized. Think of it like the official historical records of a nation, the kind of text that scribes would consult, that priests would reference, that the educated class would quote. But then something happened. The book vanished. The thing nobody tells you is, we have no record of when it disappeared, no account of who took it, no explanation for why one of the most frequently cited books in ancient Israel simply ceased to exist. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in caves near Qumran, hundreds of ancient texts, fragments of nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, Jewish writings, commentaries, records dating back over 2,000 years. You know what wasn't among them? The Book of Jasher. Not a single fragment. Not even a mention. The early church fathers, who wrote extensively about scripture and debated which books should be included in the biblical canon, show no knowledge of a Book of Jasher either. By the time Christianity was spreading across the Roman Empire, the book had already vanished. This is the part that defies all logic. How does a book cited in the Bible itself just disappear? For over 1,000 years, there's complete silence. No copies, no references, no debates about its contents. And then, suddenly, in the Middle Ages, books claiming to be the lost Book of Jasher began to appear. But the real story was just beginning. Around the 11th or 12th century, a Hebrew text surfaced claiming to be the long-lost Book of Jasher. It contained 91 chapters. It covered biblical history from the creation of the world all the way to the death of Joshua. and it included dramatic details that the Bible never mentioned. The problem? Scholars immediately noticed something was wrong. The text referred to locations by European names that didn't exist until centuries after the New Testament was written. It was like reading a book supposedly written by Julius Caesar that mentioned visiting Paris and London, except those cities didn't have those names during Caesar's lifetime. Case closed, right? Not even close. In 1625, another version appeared in print in Venice. This one claimed to be even older, more authentic. Then in 1829, an English translation emerged, supposedly based on an 8th century manuscript discovered by a scholar named Alcuin. The translator claimed this was the genuine article, the real Book of Jasher that the Bible had referenced all along, and people believed it. To this day, you can buy copies of the Book of Jasher on Amazon, published by Christian bookstores, marketed as a suppressed book that was removed from the Bible. But here's what they don't want you to know. Modern biblical scholars have thoroughly analyzed these texts, and their conclusion is unanimous. None of these books are the original Book of Jasher mentioned in the Bible. Let that sink in. The Book of Jasher you can buy today was written somewhere between the 11th and 17th centuries AD, over 1,000 years after the last book of the Bible was completed. It's not a rediscovered ancient text. It's medieval Jewish folklore, legends and traditions that developed around biblical stories, compiled by unknown authors who gave it a famous name to lend it credibility. The most shocking fact is this. The authentic Book of Jasher that Joshua and King David referenced has been lost for at least 2,000 years, and we have no idea where it went. So if the modern versions aren't authentic, what exactly do they contain? You see, the medieval Book of Jasher doesn't just retell Genesis. It expands on it in ways that raise seriously uncomfortable questions. In Genesis, Adam and Eve's story is relatively straightforward: creation, garden, temptation, fall, exile. But the Book of Jasher gives them extensive backstory. It describes their life in Eden with far more detail. It explains their abilities, their knowledge, the things they understood that later generations lost. The Bible tells us early humans lived for centuries. Adam, 930 years. Seth, 912 years. Noah, 950 years. But the Book of Jasher actually attempts to explain why. It suggests that early humanity possessed knowledge and capabilities that we've lost, that something fundamental changed after the flood. What many overlooked is this completely undermines the clean, simple narrative that religious institutions prefer to teach. And then there's Abraham. In the canonical Bible, Abraham is a man of faith, a patriarch, someone who trusted God and followed his commands. But in the Book of Jasher, Abraham is practically a superhero. According to this text, the evil king Nimrod threw Abraham into a massive furnace for refusing to worship idols. The flames were so intense that the men who threw him in were burned to death. Abraham, he walked out unharmed. The Bible mentions none of this. Or consider Moses. In Scripture, he's portrayed as a humble leader who was slow of speech, a reluctant prophet who needed his brother Aaron to speak for him. The Book of Jasher paints a completely different picture. According to this text, Moses as a child possessed superhuman strength. He was a warrior, a tactical genius. This is the part that defies all logic. Why would someone create these expanded stories? What purpose did it serve? And then there's Nimrod. The Bible describes him as a mighty hunter who founded several ancient cities. But the Book of Jasher adds something bizarre. It claims Nimrod obtained mystical garments, made from the skins of animals from the Garden of Eden. And these skins gave him supernatural power over beasts. We're talking about biblical fan fiction, stories that make the patriarchs larger than life, closer to Greek mythology than to humble servants of God. To put it mildly, this creates a massive problem for religious authorities. But the strangest parts of the Book of Jasher have nothing to do with biblical figures becoming superheroes. They have to do with knowledge. The thing nobody tells you is the Book of Jasher contains descriptions of astronomical understanding that ancient people supposedly shouldn't have possessed. Detailed planetary cycles, sophisticated calendars, mathematical precision in describing celestial movements. The kind of knowledge that makes you ask an uncomfortable question. Where did this information come from? If you take the Book of Jasher seriously, you're forced to consider one of two possibilities. Either ancient civilizations were far more scientifically advanced than mainstream history acknowledges, or they received this knowledge from somewhere else. And this is where things get really disturbing. The Book of Jasher connects directly to another controversial text, the Book of Enoch. Now, Enoch is a whole different rabbit hole, but in brief, it describes beings called Watchers who descended to Earth and taught humans forbidden knowledge, astronomy, metallurgy, weapon making, cosmetics. The Book of Jasher, in chapters 3 through 38, appears to reference the same events. Both texts describe a time when humanity possessed wisdom far beyond what you'd expect from a Bronze Age civilization. Imagine the church trying to explain this. How do you tell your congregation that ancient humans might have had access to advanced scientific knowledge? How do you maintain the narrative of linear technological progress from primitive to modern? You don't. You suppress the book. And then there are the war accounts. The Book of Jasher describes battles involving armies numbering in the millions, not thousands, millions. It details military strategies and tactical formations that seem impossibly sophisticated for the time period. Compare that to what historians tell us about ancient warfare. Most battles in the ancient world involve forces of a few thousand at most. But if you start treating the Book of Jasher's accounts as historically accurate, you start questioning everything. This changes everything we thought we knew about population sizes, about logistics, about the organizational capacity of ancient civilizations. And once people start digging into those questions, they might discover that the official narrative doesn't quite add up. So, again, the book had to go. Here's what we've been building toward. The question that everyone asks, why was the Book of Jasher removed from the Bible? But that question is based on a false assumption. The Book of Jasher was never removed from the Bible because it was already lost long before the Bible was ever compiled. Let me explain. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, wasn't assembled all at once. It took centuries. Jewish scholars and religious authorities debated which books were truly inspired, which texts should be preserved, which should be considered authoritative. This process was largely complete by around 200 BC. By that time, the Book of Jasher was already gone. There's no conspiracy, no church council that voted to suppress it, no evil bishops burning copies in secret. The original Book of Jasher simply vanished from history. The implications are explosive. Think about what this means. The Bible itself references a book that its own compilers couldn't find, a text so important that biblical authors cited it as evidence, but which had disappeared without a trace. So, what happened to it? The most likely explanation? The Book of Jasher was destroyed during one of the many catastrophes that befell ancient Israel. Maybe during the Babylonian conquest in 586 BC, when Jerusalem was burned and the temple destroyed. Maybe earlier, during various invasions and wars. Or maybe it was simply lost over time, as copies degraded and weren't replaced. We will never know. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The fact that modern versions claim to be this lost book reveals something about human nature. We're so desperate for hidden knowledge, for secret wisdom, for answers that mainstream religion won't give us, that we'll believe almost anything if it promises to fill in the gaps. The medieval Book of Jasher is successful precisely because it gives people what they want: detailed stories, expanded explanations, superhuman heroes, advanced knowledge. It's biblical fan fiction that people mistake for sacred text. And the marketing is brilliant. The suppressed book that was removed from the Bible. Except it wasn't suppressed. It wasn't removed. It was already lost. So, if the authentic Book of Jasher is lost forever, does that mean the Bible is incomplete? This is where the investigation leads us. The Book of Jasher isn't the only ancient text referenced in the Bible that no longer exists. The Bible also mentions the Book of the Wars of the Lord, the Book of Samuel the Seer, the Book of Nathan the Prophet, the Book of Gad the Seer, the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, the Acts of Rehoboam. None of these books have survived. Does that make the Bible unreliable? Does it mean we're missing crucial information? Here's the truth that religious authorities don't emphasize enough. Biblical authors didn't just copy from earlier sources. They were writing under what believers call divine inspiration. When Joshua referenced the Book of Jasher, he wasn't saying, "Go read that book instead of trusting my account." He was saying, "What I'm telling you is so well documented that you can even find it recorded in your national historical chronicles." It was validation, corroboration, like citing multiple sources for the same event. The Book of Jasher was evidence, not revelation. Think about how modern historians work. They cite primary sources. They reference other historical documents. But if some of those source documents were later lost, it wouldn't invalidate the historian's work. The information was recorded. The facts were verified. The historian's account stands on its own. But what many overlooked is this raises a fascinating question about the nature of Scripture itself. If God intended for the Book of Jasher to be part of the Bible, why would He allow it to be lost? The answer changes everything. The Book of Jasher wasn't meant to be Scripture. It was meant to be history, a record of events that the biblical authors could reference, but not a divinely inspired text in itself. Otherwise, God would have preserved it the way He preserved the books that were meant to be in the Bible. So, where does this leave us? The most disturbing discovery isn't that the Book of Jasher was removed or suppressed. It's that thousands of people are reading medieval forgeries and believing they're reading authentic ancient scripture. Walk into any Christian bookstore. Search on Amazon. You'll find multiple versions of the Book of Jasher being sold. Many include subtitles like "A Suppressed Book Removed from the Bible," "The Lost Book of Jasher," "Rediscovered Ancient Scripture." None of that is true, and here's why it matters. When you mix folklore with scripture, you create confusion. When you present Jewish legends as historical fact, you undermine actual biblical scholarship. When you market forgeries as suppressed truth, you feed conspiracy theories about the church hiding knowledge from believers. To put it mildly, this does more harm than good. But there's something else at work here. The popularity of books like the Forged Jasher reveals a hunger, a desire for more than what's on the surface. People want to understand the mysteries of the Bible. They want the backstories, the details, the expanded universe, if you will. And when mainstream religion doesn't satisfy that hunger, people turn to alternative sources, even if those sources aren't reliable. The irony is that legitimate biblical scholarship has uncovered incredible insights. Archaeological discoveries have verified biblical accounts. Ancient texts have illuminated the historical context of Scripture. But those real discoveries don't get marketed with the same sensational headlines as suppressed ancient books. Truth is often less exciting than mystery. So, what's the final answer to our question? Why is the Book of Jasher not in the Bible? Because the authentic Book of Jasher mentioned in Joshua and 2 Samuel was lost over 2,000 years ago. The versions being sold today are medieval compositions written centuries after Christ, and no suppression or conspiracy was needed to keep it out of the Bible. It was already gone. The authentic Book of Jasher remains one of history's lost treasures, a text so important that biblical authors referenced it, a chronicle of miracles and national tragedies. But whatever knowledge it contained, whatever additional details it provided, they weren't necessary for the Bible to accomplish its purpose. The scripture we have is complete, not because it contains every historical document ever written, but because it contains everything God wanted preserved. The Book of Jasher was history. The Bible is revelation. And there's a crucial difference between the two. Does this mean we should ignore the medieval Book of Jasher entirely? Not necessarily. It has value as a window into how Jewish communities in the Middle Ages understood their ancient history, how they filled in the gaps, how they preserved oral traditions and legends. But it should never be confused with Scripture. The real Book of Jasher is lost to history, and perhaps that's exactly how it was meant to be. What do you think happened to the authentic Book of Jasher? Was it destroyed in one of Israel's conquests, lost to time? Or is there a possibility that somewhere, buried in a cave or forgotten in an ancient library, a copy still exists? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this investigation into biblical mysteries fascinated you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history that defies all logic. Because the truth is always more disturbing than you think.